Welcome into the show, How to Buy a Homies. You know, as we go into 2026, I understand that everybody feels like you're getting squeezed, that affordability isn't an option for you. And a lot of that is because of the billionaire economy we have, that upper 1% that makes the rest of us feel like the usual paths to success, they're just not there. And because I'm constantly looking at this and I'm researching and I want to help you guys find solutions, I ended up finding Zachary Foust. Many of you might know him. He's kind of an internet sensation. So for some general education on the economy in general and things that you can do as a first-time home buyer to beat what feels like an unbeatable system, I had a really interesting interview and a great conversation with Zachary Foust. This dude is awesome, and you know I love him because he's all about the math and the data. He's not just sharing things for clicks and likes and hyperbole just to get people to pay attention. He's actually breaking it down and showing you the path to be able to win. So enjoy this interview with someone who is really taking the time to do what I love, which is helping lift up people and make sure that they can succeed.
How to Buy a Home educates, protects, and connects first-time home buyers to qualified vetted realtors in their area. Whether you're looking for DIY information or step-by-step guidance, How to Buy a Home is the #1 resource for first-time home buyers.
What's happening, How to Buy a Home? He's so excited today. I've got a powerhouse guest. This is Zach Foust. If you don't know who he is, he's an 8-year real estate veteran. He's also a proud military veteran. And he doubles and has been growing a gigantic audience as a financial analyst. Got a lot to say about what's going on with our economy as well as what's going on with the housing market because he's an 8-year real estate pro. I like to say that we're very aligned. He's my brother from another mother. It's got millions of followers on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all over the place. He's actually been doing something that I really love. He's calling out the big investors and the broken policies that have been snatching up the houses and squeezing out the working class, regular people who need to buy a home. He's so passionate about it. Some of his listeners are asking him to run for office. Dude, seriously, are we going to see Zach on a ticket someday? Come on, buddy. Give us the inside scoop.
Listen, first of all, thanks for creating this space, brother. Round 2. And as many listeners will know, this is our second time doing this, which I'm happy because I do align with you heavy. So I'm looking forward to this. But dude, I'm letting my path just lay itself out. I don't know where this leads.
Well, it's exciting because I know that, you know, at one point when we talked, you were like, you know what? I'm just like a numbers geek and I get into this stuff and I start spreading what I see. You're such a high level analyst, especially for such a young dude. And so my listeners, they're always coming to me going, okay, I want to buy a home. And 20 years of helping first time home buyers and coaching them. One of the big mistakes I see people make is looking at these big pictures and, you know, maybe pulling the waiting game like, oh, something's going to happen. Something's going to crash. So I'm always trying to keep them up to date. So what are you seeing right now with the economy? And I think we align in the fact that we're seeing that it's getting harder for people. So what's the message that one of the main messages you're sending to people? I mean, I've seen, you know, some of your videos on YouTube where you're talking about people printing money. So what are the 2026 headlines you're letting people know about?
Well, a continuation of the 2025 and 2024, and really ever since the shifting of our economy and COVID, is that we are in a bifurcated economy, which is just like a snake tongue. It goes off on two sides. We're in a K-shaped economy. And what I want to let people know the most is that the people who are yelling the loudest about things are fine and things are good are usually on the top side of that K, leaving those who are seeing something and feeling something completely different on the bottom side to say, well, wait a minute, that's not what I see. And so 2026, unfortunately, I think I see more of that incoming via things like you mentioned, money printing, quantitative easing, reserve management, whatever they want to call it, via just consistent and constant policies and legislation that benefit billionaires and bankers over the working class.
We've been talking about the K-shaped economy here on the podcast, and that's why, you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to people about a rent replacement strategy, you know, if they're putting a large amount of money in rent and they're waiting for the American dream, that top part of the K is not bringing us fairy dust and looking to help the American dream. And
no, that would be trickle down economics, and that doesn't work.
Yes. My father would be very angry at me for saying this. He's a big Reagan man, but I was like, dude, didn't work then, not going to work now.
47 years and we're still waiting on the trickle.
I know. I'm sitting here, and there are people, palms up. Come on, drop on me. I know that, everything, so many home buyers are looking at the Fed and they're looking at mortgage interest rates and assuming that correlation between the Fed rate and mortgage interest rates. And what's really interesting is the stuff you've been talking about, the behind the scenes, the fact that quantitative easing is coming back. Give us a little definition for the folks who don't understand what quantitative easing is and how it's coming back into the Fed and how that might affect the housing market.
The simplest way we can put it is looking at the holdings of our central bank, the assets that our Fed holds. And our central bank, our Federal Reserve, both not federal and don't require reserves, so great name, is the the one that is altering the rate, as you mentioned, the Fed rate, which is the overnight bank exchange rate, and one that people look to often when it comes to how much money is going in or out of our system. Now, a simple way that we can look at QE, by definition, is when they're buying assets from banks, institutional banks like bonds and securities, and holding them off market. We can see that increase has begun in 2026 now as quantitative tightening is done. And we can very easily look at the graph that shows the holdings of assets by the Federal Reserve is now beginning to tick up, which means they're holding more assets off market. And the reason for this is economically quite simple. They want lower rates and more liquidity. Liquidity is money in the system. That's like the water that pumps through the pipes of our plumbing of our economy. And rates determine a lot. It determines how much it's going to cost for you to pay for that car. It also determines what our interest rate for our government's debt is going to be. It determines quite a lot. But where the disconnect usually is that people think the Fed rate determines those rates. That's not necessarily true. It's more the bonds, specifically the 10-year Treasury bond. And what we've been seeing is the 10-year Treasury bond is not reacting to the Fed cuts as it traditionally does. In 2024, we saw the same thing, where the 30-year mortgage rate in July, when they had first started whispers of a Fed rate cut, the rate started dropping on a 30-year mortgage, as I'm sure you remember. We saw in September of 2024 that by the time that Fed rate cut had actually come to fruition, that the 10-year actually reacted by going upward. Same thing happened in October, where it went up. We saw another Fed rate coming, baked in slightly, and then afterwards went up. December, again, went up to the point where by January, the 30 rate was higher than it was in July when they first got the whispers of cuts. 2025 has been a similar story, similar amount of cuts, and the bond just hasn't moved. And people say, well, why isn't it moving? Simple. If you're investing in something, Dave, if something is a worthwhile investment, something you're really excited for, do you require more or less as a return on your investment? Usually when people find guarantees, like when we look at bonds or CDs, they're willing to make a little less because it's a guarantee. When it's riskier, they want to make more. They want to make more back on their investment. And so what we're simply seeing is that detachment from 2024, 2025 now of the Fed rate dropping and the 10-year following suit, which the 10-year typically brings us our 30-year rate. And quite simply, they are the investors of our bonds requiring more in return because they see more risk in the form of inflation in the forefront. And that's where the Fed gets involved and got involved in 2008 and is now getting involved in 2026 with reserve management. They are actively printing money so that they can get these rates eventually lowered. They can put liquidity into the system because right now the bond investor just doesn't like our economy, doesn't like our dollar.
And with the bond investor not loving jumping into the economy because of all this volatility or confusion, then the bond rates have to be higher to attract more people into it. And what people don't understand is that spread. We like the spread around 1.8, 1.9 between mortgage rates and the bonds. And that has been, over 2 for a long time. When someone's attempting to buy a home, are you looking at helping them to understand the economy by them just Fed watching, or is there a bigger picture you like to tell them?
Well, the bigger picture is I don't think there's a big impending crash to wait for. That's the main message. I don't think just based off supply and demand principles that we have any route toward gaining the supply that we'd need to cause price suppression nationally. I think that if you look at 2008 and 10 versus today, the supply differences are vast between nearly 4 million homes then and 1 million now. And of this million, about half is new construction. Then only about 15% was new construction. We had a lot of real people selling their homes because they needed to. And a lot of that had to do with the subprime mortgage bubble. And there's a lot of strings we can talk about from why we got into that situation. But I don't think we're in that situation today.
And I appreciate you saying that. I have been so much so on my show that my producer created a drop so that every time that I say the main thing that's affecting the housing inventory or the housing market is, and there's this goofy drop that goes low inventory. And it's the supply and demand. But I appreciate the fact that you're coming at it from a different economic spin and that you're bringing the correct numbers in for that. And also that you're refuting, I know that, you're a big guy on social media, seeing these ridiculous forecasts for a 50% drop for 2026.
Oh my God. Based off no numbers. I watched that video and so many media outlets picked it up because it's what everybody wants, myself and you included.
Of course I do.
Want home prices to get down to a point where they match median income. It's a wage crisis that we're in. And the inflation of costs has far superseded the inflation of income. And if you just looked at a business and you said, hey, your expenses are 50% higher, but we're going to give you a 12% increase in your income, you're going to go under. And that's where a lot of households kind of feel like they're at right now. And if you're on the outside looking in to buying a household, I can understand we need this to drop. We need this to drop. And systemically, you're correct. Economically, you're correct. But when we look at the current system and how it's operating, I'd argue it's operating as designed.
I read a really interesting article that talked about exactly what you were talking about and what I talk about on the podcast all the time. The decrease in homes being built, even though we had a surplus of resale homes 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, that dropped the inventory. Some estimates are, 4 to 6 million short of the amount of homes that we need just from new construction. So they're saying that from 2012, 13, there was one article that predicted it was a 30-year cycle before we saw the traditional 4 years up in prices and 4 years down in prices in real estate. Obviously, we've had crazy things that have affected that. And what COVID did was it created this crazy spike. So we got that 53, 54% increase. So now if people are coming to you or me and saying, hey, I'm excited to buy a home like my friend did in 2021, I want that sweet 40, 50% appreciation. I'm not in a place where I'm saying, as you like to say, my crystal ball's in the shop. I'm the same way, man. I'm not saying there's going to be gigantic appreciation over the next couple of years, but I'm also saying there's not going to be a gigantic crash. So do the math. Is renting for the next 5 years going to be a better situation for you? Now, I also love the fact that you are presenting this information, explaining the K-shaped economy to people so that the little man understands. But it's a little bit like ripping a Band-Aid off at first. And you do that sometimes with your passion, explaining. Do you find a lot of your listeners, a lot of people are like, bro, I had no idea how bad it sucked. Thanks for telling me.
Yeah. You ever watch that movie Bird Box?
Oh, I don't know that one.
So it was on Netflix a few years ago. I think it was pre-COVID. And it was this, someone compared it to that. I was like, that is kind of what it is. I don't like that.
Wait, was that the blindfolded one?
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's
yeah.
all these, there was this crazy thing going on and everyone's like, don't look at it. Don't look at it. I feel like I'm the guy like, no, rip off your blindfold. Look at it. Stare at it. Look at it. The problem with understanding is simultaneously realizing you've been lied to. And that sucks, right? It sucks being a sports head for my whole life and realizing that's a big part of the bread and circuses entertainment to get us to not focus on the realities. It sucks going into a entrepreneur type role and realizing that if I was in a fixed income situation, I would have been screwed. I got lucky. And it also sucks knowing I served in the military. I went overseas, did the Afghanistan thing, and realizing, I was there to protect poppy fields. I was here for the oil industry. I was a representative of Exxon, not the Army. And it sucks when you go into why we even created our Federal Reserve in 1913 and the meeting that happened 3 years before and why that was orchestrated. It sucks to look at our globalization of the dollar effect, where we tried to colonize the world with our dollar in 1944, and why we ripped away from that in 71, and why we implemented the petrodollar in 74, and Henry Kissinger and everything involved in that. It stinks to realize that a lot of the billionaire control, which many would argue, Zach, that's been around for a long time. Yeah, but there was about 80 to 100 billionaires in the 60s, and now we have over 2,000. Yes, inflation, but at the same time, the wealth gap has grown. At the same time, income hasn't grown. At the same time, the opportunity for the working class has diminished, as we see now AI is pushing the youth out of the labor market. If you're under 30, there's a high chance, if you have a degree, that you are underemployed, meaning you make less than what your education permits. 51% of degreed under 30-year-old individuals right now are underemployed. It's 65% if you have something like a criminal justice degree. It's not people that have social justice degrees and poetry and French literature like certain news programs would like to portray. No, these are real degrees of computer engineering that are getting beaten by coding robots and are getting beaten by large language models. And AI is only one piece of the puzzle, but the labor market is struggling, and it's struggling in most part to supply the working class with enough income to sustainably survive, not even close to thrive, just survive in this economy. With now the NAR says you need to make $108,000 a year to get into a starter home.
A lot of times my listeners and people who are just solely focused on looking to buy a home, they look at that and they see unaffordability, and that's why they love and listen to the 50% prediction that, you know, we have to crash in order for everything to get back to where it needs to be. But understanding the history of things like you're talking about, AI, yes, this is the most recent biggest blip, but this started back in the 70s and the 80s when the wage gap happened, and we changed things with the dollar, and the charts for that are ridiculous.
You can go to whatthefhappened in 1971.com and you're going to get loaded with graphs.
Wow.
I
like that.
From affordability to foreign aid to incarcerations of individuals who aren't white. I mean, every stat you could think of, look at the 70s to the early 80s and look at how everything changed, right? And this is where I'll have debates with one guy we text all the time, multimillionaire, about this very topic. And he sits on the side of, this has always been a talking point. This has always been a boogeyman. And though I can agree with that, there's stats to say that boogeyman's growing in power, all while we're being propagandized to believe they need to have that power to keep our ecosystem running. And yes, we need people like Bezos to run Amazon if you want boxes to show up at your door. And we need people to run the DoorDash algorithms so that we can get your food. And I understand there's certain things that need to operate so you can have your life. But the lack of employee ownership in those companies, the consolidation of the wealth that goes to the top and those that are invested in that company is pushing off people specifically that haven't invested in an asset before. And the home is normally the gateway drug to asset ownership that allows you the opportunity to grow, right? And the entry into that table, like that roulette table, now the opening bet is way higher than it was just 10 years ago.
Yeah, and that entry level used to have a simpler path. And that's where I always try to explain to people it's so complex, because all of this comes into it, because we're talking about when they were able to do it, with the wages post-college graduate, and because that's changed so much. And so what's happened now, the National Association of Realtors has brought the average age up to 40 years old for first-time home buyers. We have a bunch of people at 22, 23 who come into this market struggling for wages and to be, something that is comparable to the degree that they just got. And they end up continuing renting through their 20s and their 30s. And that first piece, like you said, it's just, they see it as way too expensive to get in the game and start building their assets. So when you're talking to people about assets and pulling off the blindfold, understanding this is where we are, what are some of the pieces of the puzzle that you're explaining to people that could give them an option? Because we can't go backwards and have it the way it was. So how are we moving forward?
Depends. There's the unrealistic conversation of what we could actually do to solve these problems systemically from the legislative standpoint.
Give me the tinfoil hat. Let's have a moment. Come on, baby.
What we could actually do. We can put on a tinfoil hat for sure. We'll get into that. But then there's also like, what could I actually realistically do, assuming the game doesn't change, assuming the rules don't change, assuming we're going to keep down this path of being a debt-fueled society in this usury, fractional reserve lending model that we built for ourselves. And the answer is, honestly, you cannot be in a fixed income scenario, right? If you are a young man, young woman, you have to get something in your life that allows your time, effort, and skills to determine your worth financially. And the person that's just making 48 grand depending on nothing, they could work hard, they could not work hard as long as they keep their job, 48 grand. Like, you're not growing with the economy. If you don't hold an asset, an index fund, gold, silver, a crypto, a home, some form, a luxury car collection, like something that's going to go up with the value of our economy, the weakness of our dollar, because a lot of the inflation of the stock market has to just simply do with there are more dollars in the system, stock buybacks too, and things of that nature. But the answer to me is just go down the path of least resistance, right? I start with the baseline. You must afford your mortgage twice. You need to be able to afford your mortgage twice. So a lot of it comes down to income. And gaining more income could have to do with changing careers, changing location, changing your mindset. And then when you get to the point where it's possible, you need to go down the path of least resistance. Townhomes aren't sexy, but they're affordable to build and they're cheaper, especially if they're on the outside of a primary market and they're going to grow from what we call in Delaware being close to the sun, right? Wilmington, Middletown, and Rehoboth Beach are like the three suns of our market. Don't go buy in those areas. Buy in Newark, buy in Harbison, buy in Odessa and Townsend, these supplementary markets, these sub-markets around the sun, because they're going to run out of dirt. And if you can get a townhome that is outside of the sun, now it's time for the mortgage. And I think there's a lot of people that don't understand what the state housing authorities do in their own state. And you can look up local housing authority. So like Delaware State Housing Authority, Michigan State Housing Authority. And you could see, are they giving money, lower rates? Is it a loan? Is it a lien? Is it forgiven? Is it not? Because there's a lot of states that will say, we'll give you money. And as long as you stay there for the next 10 years, we'll forgive it. And why would they do that? Well, because you're a great investment. You own a share of the land. You're going to be a more willing participant in the labor force. You're going to be a better participant in consumer spend in our local economies. You're going to support small business. You're going to be happier. You're going to have less crime because people actually take care of their neighborhoods. Values go up. It makes a lot of sense. And I would say the path of least resistance is the FHA loan or USDA if it qualifies in your area, mixed with your local state housing authority to get a townhome. And the last little bit, and it's the most controversial, you could take it or you can leave it and throw it under the rug, whatever you'd like. New construction. Back to the conversation about supply. 2010, we peaked at over 4 million homes on the market. Today, we have just over 1 million. In 2010, if you look at a census report, we can find that of that 4 million, and it's approximate, I think it was like 4.16.
Mm-hmm.
About 508,000 were new construction, built for purchase, never lived in. 500,000 of about 4 million. So what's that, 12%?
Yeah.
Today, we have just over 1 million homes, and about 500,000 are new construction. 50% of our supply is being built for sale, and they're struggling. They're struggling heavy. They're offering incentives. They're offering closing cost assistance. They're negotiating. Heck, not even negotiating. They're rolling over. We had a one the other day, $368,000. We gave an offer of $322,000. They accepted with no negotiation. They're struggling to move inventory. And we also know that they're not building nearly as much. They're actually slowing down. You may be thinking, Zach, why are they slowing down? We need homes. There's not enough buyers on the other side. Cost of getting the land developed has gone up exponentially. A lot of the homes that you're seeing being built right now began their planning phase 3.5 years ago. Land acquisition, zoning, infrastructural costs paid, get the labor together, get the engineers out there. How many sidewalks do we need? How many light poles do we need? Where are the trees going to go? All that's done. Do you think there's a lot of people looking at this economy and looking at this housing market like, man, I'm going to build a bunch of neighborhoods? Not many. And we're seeing that effect. So I don't think the problem gets solved in supply from new construction. This problem can get solved from regular everyday people needing to sell. And the catch-22 with that is high unemployment. So I don't think that the working class wants a crash as badly as they think, because if we were to actually see those 20, 30, 40, 50% drawbacks, it means the unemployment rate had to have been going nuts in the interim.
I'm sitting here jotting notes down because you have hit on so many things that we've hit on here on the show. The down payment assistance potential, especially at the state level, gigantic. And, a lot of people, I'll talk to a lot of people who are high income people, or medium to high income people who go, oh, that stuff's not for me. And I'm like, hey, I think third or fourth quarter last year, there were 70 new programs that popped up. Because since October 2023, as interest rates hit 8%, we've been in this giant freeze. So those down payment assistance programs are available at multiple different types of people with different incomes. And like you talked about, there is an investment in the area, in the community, that the states, the cities, the counties are offering. The new construction, I think it was a year and a half ago, maybe even, where we had our first person come on that we're like, oh my God, we got a 4.99 interest rate when rates were at 7. And talking about the statistics that you gave, 50% right now. And like you said, they're not starting that 3-year process. There is, even though it feels like everything is frozen, things are too high, interest rates are too high, there is a quiet sale happening in America, and it's new construction starter homes. Yeah. It's just about finding the right
Because you mentioned
team.
those high rates. I mean, how do you think they finance the equipment? How do you think they finance their supplies?
Yes.
How do you think they finance the purchase? They're having to pay those high rates too. And I know, like, go cry a river, the billionaire has to pay more. That's fine. They're just not doing it.
With that being a potential for people, and I love your townhome outside the sun. Like for areas in Atlanta or Dallas, it would be outside the loop. They have a loop, a circle. And I tell people all the time, if you're 35 and you're feeling this stuck, the great freeze of the last 2 years that we felt for first-time homebuyers, then go outside the sun, and instead of continuing to rent for the next 5 or 10 years, look at that townhome option. It's probably going to be the same as your home, and it ends up being a lot of remove. And if the numbers work out, unfortunately, taking off the blindfold, that happens to be one avenue. And so here I am, a guy who started a podcast to help first-time homebuyers in 2019, and I have the least sexiest product to explain to people anymore, because now
Doesn't
I'm going,
that suck? Because it used to be so fun and fulfilling to help somebody get into a great investment that they simultaneously get to raise their kids in, have their dog run in the yard, have their Thanksgiving dinners at. And can I tell a quick story?
please.
So I saw the guy the other day. I've just been calling him Ryan because I don't use his real name.
Yep.
He works at Wawa. And if you're unfamiliar with Wawa, you have him in Florida, but it's like a East Coast, Mid-Atlantic. We're like a downgrade of, what's the other one out in the Midwest? It's so much better. Either way, Wawa, Hoagie, Deli, gas station. And when we originally worked together, me and Ryan, he worked there making about 38, 42 grand. He worked some overtime to get that. And single, kid, dog. With no money down, USDA loan, was able to get him a mortgage of about $1,000. It was a $170,000 Class C property in Houston, Delaware. It's spelled Houston, but we're not allowed to say that. So Houston, Delaware, definitely outside the sun.
Yeah.
$1,000 mortgage. So he fit the NAR demographic of a starter home, because that same stat I read you the other day saying you need to make the other moment 108,000, the number was 46 grand then. Wow. So he fit right on the button.
Yep.
I saw him the other day back in September. And when I talked to him, he has a house, have the kids, grown up. Oh my God, she's like a teenager now. And I was curious. I said, how much does she make now? He said, oh, I make about 62 grand. He's a manager now.
Great.
Manager. Make about 62 grand. Making what he makes now at a better job and a better financial position, he has savings now, he couldn't requalify for the very house he lives in.
Yeah.
And if he sold it, he couldn't go anywhere. There's There's nihilism about the market for sure when you get into the depths and the weeds of it. But the ultimate reality is we're in a debt-based society that has to continue to inflate. We have to keep spending. We have to keep taking out loans. We have to keep creating credit because credit is somebody else's income. And if we don't provide somebody else's income, something falls, something fails, something cracks. And to the argument of it has to crash. Well, 2019, October, you know something happened that was not COVID related? We had a liquidity crisis. We had a repo market crisis. And we needed money. We needed money fast. And it just so happens that we had a great excuse to do so in about 4 months. And we did. Trillions, biggest QE we ever had. And there was a liquidity crisis that stemmed from when? 2008. What did we do that time? We printed money. We keep the ball rolling. There is a need for a correction. There is a need for a crash. There is a need for a cycle to emerge, but we are the world reserve currency that holds the biggest money printer on the planet. And we're very undisciplined with it. And we'll do anything to keep the ball rolling. And what that means by definition is assets keep inflating.
And so many of the policies are being invented and reinvented based on 2 and 4 year election cycles.
Yes.
That nothing is, it's just continually kicking the can down the road. And again, it's not sexy for me to sit here and sell the product of Ryan. Hey, here's an affordable way, either using a down payment assistance or USDA or, the VA. Such an incredible resource for military and veterans.
Use that twice. Yeah.
Yep. And it's not sexy for me to say, do this because you might not have an option, even if you continue on your regular income earning down the line. But Ryan's a perfect example of getting in while you can get in. And I hate to be the kind of person who says, well, just sit back and take it. But at this point right now, I'm not doing anything to change the fiscal policy. I'm just listening to people like you to understand it. And what was really interesting is I saw one of your most recent YouTubes and I was really excited about it. It was like, oh, great. Here's the 2020 things to do for 2026. You basically just talked about mental health for like half an hour because you've had the blindfold ripped off for a while and you know what people need. And that was really interesting to me. Are you finding that when you're having these conversations with people that a lot of times kind of helping them calm down and see the status quo, which isn't going to be helpful, is that you're having to talk to them about taking a breath and making sure that they see the big picture?
You're right. I focus on this thing we've been calling holistic wealth. That wealth has been propagandized to be money. And man, I've met some people with a lot of money that aren't wealthy. I've met multimillionaires, been at billionaires' home, and get to see the shallow relationship they have with their spouse or the conversation with their kids that they don't want to do anything close to what their dad's doing. I've seen the person with the fancy spider convertible V8 woogie woogie that can't fit in it because they're too fat. Are they wealthy? Right? They're so encumbered by the treasures of this earth that they have no spirit about them whatsoever. And I just don't consider that wealthy. And to answer your question, dude, as to what I'm doing, I've been getting a lot of insight from the people that watch my content that has helped me kind of decipher that more, because it does feel like I'm helping rip blindfolds off of people. And simultaneously, I do know what that causes, because, you can look at my content. If you look back to summer of 2023, you're going to see I went on about a 7-month hiatus. I didn't post anything. And it was because I needed to step back and breathe. I needed to step back and reconfigure what I thought I was living in America, what I thought I was doing here with my life. And somebody brought it up on a comment section the other day, and I found it to kind of be akin to one of the first goals I ever wrote down. When I first started my business selling real estate, one of the goals I had was to get to the point where I could get to the finish line and turn around and help other people cross it. And simultaneously, I wanted to be a voice for the people that are affected by what I was affected by, which was really intense bullying in school and not feeling I was worth anything, and what that was doing to my decision making as a young adult, and what that was doing to my emotional life, and what little I knew about myself. And I wanted to be someone who could go back and help those people. And I think right now that's kind of what I'm doing is I want to help people simultaneously understand and then survive and thrive in the system. I want to go back to my 18-year-old self and give them a hug. And in the mental health space, we see depths of despair are at near Great Depression highs. Suicide rates are up. Drug use is up. And man, every 20-year-old male I see is waiting for their next drink, waiting for the next Zyn they can put in their mouth, or craving that pen that's in their pocket. And those physical vices, I'm not demeaning them or diminishing them. I'll have a smoke of weed, but the physical need to suppress the current moment and escape it 24/7, whether it's scrolling, whether it's through arguments and comment sections, or whether it's from picking up something physical or looking at porn, going after a drug, there's so many different vices, pick yours, is not productive in any way. And it's very easy to get into that point where you're like, okay, well, the system's corrupt, screw this. And that's just not the wave. You're beautifully made, you're capable of incredible things, and this world has algorithmically decided that it was going to make you feel like you were worth less. And I'm here to tell you you're worth a lot more than what you're being told you are. And so, yeah, I spent a good bit of that talking about that, because there's a lot of people who feel beaten, feel bullied by the system, and that's not fair.
Wow. Just amazing. I'm soaking this all in. I'm much older than you, dude. At 49, I crossed my finish line and turned around.
Amen.
And because my wife said to me, I'm in Southern California, 280, 90 something transactions with people who work at Disneyland, because I got my license right before the crash. And I worked at Disneyland in high school and college. So I helped a ton of first-time homebuyers buy, because they got what today's renters are hoping for, a gigantic crash. Suddenly they could afford. And 12 years into my real estate career, my wife looked at me and goes, man, you're burning out. You're only happy when you work with the Disneyland people. And at first I thought, okay, that's just because I'm cheesy and Disneyland people are cheesy like me. But no, turned out that was my finish line. And I said, hey, hon, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I think I want to start a whole thing just to help first-time homebuyers, because like you, I don't see the sexy finish, and I see everybody looking for it. I was at a real estate seminar the other day. You were talking about young males and the vices. The numbers, I don't remember the numbers, and I really should. So Google, how many men 18 or to 30 were gambling 3 years ago versus today? It's like something like 600% up. And I think that a lot of times in today's world, what you're doing is going to be very helpful for people. We're going to help you find the not sexy return, but the stable return. But you're going to start with their mental health first, because it's like you're taking everybody getting ready to storm the beaches of Omaha, and there's a whole bunch of people that are in there in shorts and tank tops. And you're like, we got to gear up. I got to get you ready for this. And that's such an amazing piece of the puzzle. And obviously I was interested in it because you came from a real estate perspective first.
That was the start. It was like, why can't people afford homes?
Yeah. Yeah. And you do a very good job talking to people about, if you're waiting for that crash, let me explain the geeky math stuff behind it. Like, if we get a 20, 30% correction, you talk about what has to happen with credit and unemployment, and how everybody rooting for a crash, you're basically telling yourself, okay, but then there's a 30% chance that I'm going to be unemployed if that happens. So who cares if the home you want to buy is suddenly $100,000 off, because now you don't have a job. If you're rooting for a crash, there are tons of other economic factors that are going to be affected by it.
I got the numbers pulled up for you.
Yeah, do it.
So as of right now, adults 18 years or older that are participating in sports gambling specifically was
Yes.
below 8% before 2010. Now is at 22%. So now we're talking over 1 out of 5. And I don't want to read too many numbers I just pulled up because I want to make sure that they're accurate. But listen, the mask gets removed, like it's almost like scales from the eyes. It's blinding at first to view the system the way it is, because then you can't view a set of commercials without saying, make yourself feel better about yourself. This person will like you better if you do this. If you own that, you're going to be better as a self-worth. Your self-worth will go up. If you don't gamble, you're not going to have fun. If you don't drink, who are you at the party? There's so much, from the terrible food that's advertised and what's in it to just the lifestyle is pushed down the throats of anyone who dares consume the media. And whether it's doom and gloom from news media, whether it's distraction from sports media or what have you, it's consume, spend. And not just your money, spend your emotion with us. Numb yourself. Get to the point where you don't have to feel those negative feelings anymore. We can help you with that. Like, everything that is pushed down our throats is not to benefit us. It's to benefit a corporation. And is that new? No. But since things like Citizens United allowing for billionaires to unfetteringly donate to campaigns as much as they would like, that is changing the laws and changing the legislation and persisting and not allowing certain legislation to be taken out because these billionaires have play in it. And the money that goes into marketing in the millions and billions of dollars are just to get your butt in a seat so you can pay something, so you can be a part of something. And most of us have to now find our identity in something external, and nothing ever teaches us how to find our identity internally. Frankly, because if we did, we'd be much worse cogs in this system. We'd be gardening and creating local communities and advocating for the poor and the homeless and the blind and doing a lot of what that guy Jesus talked about.
Yeah. Who, as we know, has been taken and using as model, and yet I'm like, oh my God, do you guys not remember the Beatitudes? Do you not understand what he actually said? And obviously, far right, far left, there's going to be extremists. But it's so interesting that the internalization doesn't fuel the corporate machine. If you're gardening, if you're taking care of your community, but before we had access to have the rest of the stuff thrown in our face, that was where a lot of your self-worth came from, going out the front door. I had a real estate conference that I went to, and the guy was talking about community and neighborhoods and talking about the cocooning of our society strictly because of the garage door opener. That
Interesting.
You went immediately into your home without having to interact with the people on your street. And I tout all the wonderfulness about home ownership, and it's so great to have a real fiscal numbers geek who cares about this like you. And I don't even get into trying to sell the emotional side of what it is anymore. What I hear more from people instead of community is, I want control. They want to paint it their way, build it their way, do it their way. And that gives me a little bit of hope, because it means there are a bunch of people that are frustrated somewhere as a renter because they're watching and they're feeling inadequate because they're seeing all that advertising like you're talking about. And I'm excited to hear that there is at least a little bit of a fire that they want to make something their own.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, Dave. Honestly, and sometimes I get caught under some fire for this take, but I think even Trump voters and supporters want a lot of what everybody else wants. I think that the removal of the deep state and running on getting corruption out of government, being what a lot of the right-wing supporters voted for, is a very valiant thing to vote for. I think a lot of people can see that the three-letter agencies and foreign governments and the control that seemingly had over our country is clear and obvious. It's just a matter of who's actually going to change it and stop it versus who maybe is a part of it. And I think everybody kind of sees that writing on the wall. And maybe that leads toward what you just said of wanting to take personal control, of just seeing that even our own country, we don't seemingly have control over what we want, what we want to see. We want to see development. We want to see growth. But for the last at least 46 years, we've been making decisions to deregulate. We've been making decisions to shift tax brackets. We've been making decisions to rep up unions, decisions to send jobs overseas across borders, to remove Glass-Steagall, one of FDR's New Deal pieces where banks can now be whatever they want. We changed the SEC margin rules to allow banks to not just invest $14 that weren't theirs, but now $49 that weren't there at scale. And the regulations that were put in post-2008 by Obama and Citizens United, just are consistently and constantly locking in the effect we're already in and protecting the upper class while sacrificing, it seems, the working class. And there's nothing that I read in that Bible, especially Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that mirrors what we're seeing. In fact, the 2 times he got ticked off, the most angry was when the synagogue was getting treated like a market and the market was getting treated like a synagogue. And our markets right now are being treated with control, and our religion is being used to fuel money gatherers and thrifters. And I hate it. I hate seeing any form of religious piety, or I can't think of the right word, but just I am better than thou because of X. Pick your religion is sick, especially when you're using that name in vain of your own gain.
Yeah. And that has, as a child older than you who grew up in the 70s and 80s and very young in the 70s, but I watched, the self-help me of the 70s and then the greed of the 80s and the beginnings of, the mega preachers who found that television could be where they could do their thing. And, since Kennedy and Nixon, when the television became how we were deciding who our elected officials were, suddenly the entire country is at the whim of the people that are either spending the money to be on television or spending the money for the commercials on television.
Yeah.
And now, over the last 10 years, it's completely shifted. The bombardment that you're talking about comes from everywhere and doom scrolling.
Absolutely. And it's controlled too, by the way. It's controlled. I can tell you from firsthand experience that 3 opportunities to be on news programs, but I had to basically say what I wasn't going to say. And I also had to be part of some form of agency to where if I said something I wasn't supposed to say, they'd make sure I didn't make myself onto another program. Even as simply, you get hit up for it. Think just real estate. Pay X amount and you'll be in this New York Times article of top 10 realtors on the come up. Pay this and you'll be on the top 20 influencers of blah, blah, blah. Zach, why weren't you on the top 20 social media, blah, blah, blah? Because I didn't pay for it. Awards. Like, you're one of Delaware's first state best. Do you want to pay $500 to be in the newspaper to show it off? Like, it's all constructed for pay to play.
There was a top real estate podcasts, top 20 real estate podcasts that just came out. The number 1 podcast was an episode where I was interviewed by another guy, and then my podcast wasn't on the list.
Really?
It was like I was the number 1 episode on the list,
but your podcast
interviewing me about what I do, and I'm constantly hit up with this, and it's you're starting to see it with what you're doing, being a voice for the people, and I've been doing it as voice for the people, but we're watching the entire real estate industry. The realtors are the consumer. Yes. And the big brokers are trying to sell them stuff.
Yep.
And in the government, lobbyists are making 10x what the congressman that they're lobbying makes per year, because their job is to influence this person who is supposedly a representative of their constituents back home.
And for those that believe that's a conspiracy theory, you can look up billionaire contribution to campaigns. And you can look pre 2008 and before, you could see it topped at about 16 to 17 million. It's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. Last year was 1.7 billion. 1.7 billion, right?
And the shell corporations and the caps that are being hidden.
Yeah.
And, finding out who's actually behind these things.
100%. Well, dude, again, conspiracy. 2001. Have you ever heard of the company Liquid Funding Ltd?
I do not know that one.
Yeah, so 2001, Liquid Funding LTE pops up. It was in Bermuda, just a shell company, as these things are. A company by the name of Bear Stearns bought them, 40% of them. Said, we want majority share of you. Why?
Right.
Didn't really say why. What we found out was eventually when we got to the point where 2008 happened, we saw this shit actually hit the fan. And what happened was all of these collateralized mortgage obligations, which we know of now, were fueling the subprime loan crisis, led us to a point where it was unsubstantiated, and Bear Stearns was one of the banks that went insolvent. Why'd they go insolvent? Because they held so many of these subprime loans. Well, where were they? Well, what was happening was they weren't showing up on their quarterly reports of these toxic assets they held until they literally couldn't afford to keep the lie going. What was happening was they were keeping these toxic assets offshore and utilizing these offshore accounts to reorganize, collateralize these loans, basically taking all these bent and wet and ripped up cards and taking the cards and making a nice new deck out of it and selling that deck as a profitable asset. That's Liquid Funding Limited. And they're not the only company that was doing it, but they're one of the major ones and the anchor of the one that suffered the first and largest collapse. Jeffrey Epstein was their chairman.
Oh.
So, corruption-wise, it's like, yo, what are we talking about here?
Oh, my goodness.
It's sick. It's sick. And the very person who created the collateralized mortgage obligation and in the commercial spaces was pushing for subprime loans because they were, like we talked about earlier, more risk, more return. The banks loved it because there was more risk, more return. The person that created the collateralized mortgage obligation in 1984 at First Boston and then pushed it for decades was Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. So it's less conspiracy, more we know the people and the people that control the system, and the system is operating as it should. So to think that we don't have corruption today when we had that corruption then, when JP Morgan, the same person who created the room that allowed for the Federal Reserve to be founded, is also getting investigated for billions being funneled through their account for Epstein, that Jess Staley, the guy who was formerly over in England with Barclays, was the JP Morgan representative who made that happen. England said, you're not allowed to work here anymore and we're fining you £1 million. Guess where he went? Back to America.
Man.
That's where it, to me, again, I get back to the same reason you can't afford a house is the same reason they don't release the Epstein list. It's control from the top.
From what we've seen over the past decade for sure, and as you were talking about, what was built before that, is that there have been attempts to shake things up. And when we get to that place and there are loud voices that are attempting to shake that up, unfortunately, the voting general public comes in and just gets down to the grassroots, what's going on with me and my economy.
Yep.
And
we saw that happen with Occupy Wall Street and why that fell apart.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And with keeping that in mind, we're pulling a blindfold off and we're attempting to offer conceptualized solutions that almost feel defeated. Like, we've got to figure out a way to run this new course, because as of today, as of right now, at the beginning of 2026, you and I don't have the power to change the game. We just know how to work in the game.
Yeah, understanding the rules of the game and who set up the rules.
Yeah. And why, unfortunately, we're not going to see anyone come in and flip the tables anytime soon.
100%. Until there's somebody who cares enough to change that. And you're right. The individual micro care about one's own life and one family, which is virtuous, causes a lot of the problem, because if the system's working for them, even though they kind of see it's iffy and corrupt, which, by the way, a lot of boomers make the wild ass take when I make some of these videos like, it's always been this way, Zach. Politicians always lie. The CIA's been lying since the 50s. You're cool with that?
Yeah.
You rock with that? Like, if my manager was sleeping around with the employees and was like, just hush, hush, keep it on, I would leave, right? If your dad was funneling money for the Russian government and you found out, you'd be like, Dad, what the hell? Like, and now we find out our actual leaders, the adults in the room, are participating in insider trade within the Congress and lobbying and taking money from other ventures to pass certain laws and not pass others. One more conspiracy, the Nixon shock. Let me go ahead and connect these two. The Nixon shock. That was started in April of 1971. It actually happened in August of 1971, but it started in April. There was an economic meeting. Him and four others. Henry Kissinger, a guy who ended up creating the petrodollar, that's another one, was there, as well as this guy named Peter G. Peterson. Peter's weird because Peter created a form, which we've never been able to see. It doesn't exist anywhere, but we know he created this form that he handed in that meeting to Nixon, which led Nixon to the point of deciding we need to detether gold. We need to get out of this because we're losing global trade. That form, that whatever synopsis convinced him. And you can look that up. Peter G. Peterson in the 80s would create a private equity firm named Blackstone, and Blackstone would create BlackRock and Larry Fink.
And to the boomers that will argue with you and say, there's always been, we've had CIA stuff happening since the 50s. Yeah, but where we were as an economy in the 40s and 50s and 60s, we're being built on the coattails of the New Deal.
Yes.
We were being built on middle class first, on working class first. And
it's easy not to care about corruption when you can afford your daycare.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier.
And now, how are you going to vote? You're going to vote for your healthcare. You're going to vote for your daycare. You're going to vote for filling up your gas tank. And for an entire new generation, I mean, that's because I'm a history buff as well. Like, it was history, musical theater, and then suddenly real estate nerd over the last 20 years. So watch out, ladies. I'm a super catch.
Super catch.
But understanding the history of where we've been and what has happened. So if in the 40s and 50s they were able to pull the wool over people's eyes for grand conspiracy theory, okay. And then they've done the same thing now in the 70s and 80s. And then now, my kids, unfortunately, know a world where going to school means figuring out how not to be shot. Mm. They talk to me about that. We got them therapy for that stuff. And now it feels like the average consumer has lived in a disaster world. The average blue collar and white, a middle class person who is trying to just survive has had to live through so many disasters and hasn't seen that all the printing money to fix said disasters is just kicking the can down the road.
Yes.
And so when they finally go to the ballot box, all they're thinking about is who's going to fix the economy right now. And
the definition of fix is propagandized in and of itself because they'll talk about, and Trump talked about it, and Biden talked about it, and the first Trump term talked about it, and Obama talked about it, and Bush talked about it, and Clinton talked about it, Reagan talked about it. We're going to get prices down. We're going to get wages up. And the latter part's possible, but hardly executed. And the first part isn't economically sound. You can't get prices down. That is called deflation. And deflation ruins economies. Deflation ruins IRAs. Deflation ruins values for people that are retiring, and they're not going to do that.
Rooting for the crash in any capacity so that you can now afford to get into this economic cycle that you want to get into is exactly the opposite of what the corporations and the people that are trying to stay elected are working against.
Yes.
Because if that happens, no one's buying their stuff and no one's reelecting them.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
We're stuck in this place where we understand how people are going to react, but who understands it way more than us? The corporations, because they're taking all our data as well, and it's just put us in such, I'm still here. I'm still positive. I'm still helping people understand, like having a conversation with you and having that beautiful understanding of the, potentially what I've described on the show is potentially a lateral move, going outside the sun, getting a townhome. So I did a podcast a few months ago about, the American dream is dead. Your picket fence might not be your first purchase. And perhaps that was the way it was. But if you pull the blindfold off and you are aware of what's going on around you, you have a better opportunity to find a new path, not the path.
Carl Sagan had a great quote about that. He said, you can only believe in the American dream if you're asleep.
Yeah. Oh, it's such an interesting world. One of the things that I get excited about is the fact that we do have some power to the people. Absolutely. In the form of a microphone and social media. And so, what you're doing is enlightening and educating people. And we say it all the time on the podcast, nothing new. No, knowledge is power. And so I really appreciate you offering this to anybody that will listen. And folks out there, you can find Zach Foust, Foust, TikTok. Yeah, you started as a TikTok machine, right? Was that the intention, or was that the first one to grow? Am I getting your origin story right?
Well, the origin story was me walking around my brokerage at Keller Williams in my first few months, just trying to ask people, how do I get business? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah.
And the answer was like, talk to your sphere, your past clients. I'm like, my sphere just got out of high school and I don't have past clients. So next, direct mail. I don't have money. Next.
Yeah.
And nobody was on Facebook. And so I decided to go on Facebook and start just going live at houses and making videos and just trying to figure that out. And it was April of 2019 that I got on TikTok, and it was super cringy. That's the kids dancing app. That's so weird. But I very soon started to see the algorithm and how it differed from every platform, where now it's everywhere. The TikTokification of algorithms. Yeah, where in this space, it was completely interest-based as opposed to who you followed. And so it was really just about me making interesting content in my niche. And that's what I did. And I talked about my old times in the Army and being a correctional officer and housing, and it did grow. But the shift for me in content happened in about 2023. And I don't make that type of content that I was back then. And now I'm focused on a different niche.
One of the comments that I saw, which was really interesting, because before we had a chance to chat, I've been consuming your stuff, but I haven't necessarily been scrolling through the comments. And it was someone in your conversation about everything that was going on in the financial world. Someone went, "Oh my God, it's like it was either a clean cut or a nice guy or a normal Joe Rogan." And I thought that was, to me, I don't know, do you take that as a compliment? I do, because it says to me that you're intriguing without being tinfoil hat.
Sure. Yeah, no, Rogan is a legend in the podcast and content creation space. And probably whether you like him or not, or whether you like his takes or who he has on or what he's done, he was one of the first people to just authentically throw a camera and a mic up and just be themselves and have conversations, and really predated what a lot of us are doing today, which is just being your actual organic self and trying to learn and trying to help people along the way. Some people will debate all the different people who are in that space as to whether they're good, bad, or ugly. But he is an influential person and cracked the code first. So he's like the OG. Well, but I don't see myself as a Rogan, though.
Yeah. I
got more hair.
I was regurgitating what I read in the comment, and I had a guess as how you were going to take it. But I come from the place, like my mom says, if someone cuts you off in the road, just assume they're rushing to the hospital.
Amen.
Because, so I assumed that person meant it in a nice way. And nowadays it's very refreshing that people are starting to understand, because Joe and many of the big people in the spaces, they originally got there because Joe always talks about, I'm here because I had Fear Factor money and I like to read. And so this was interesting to me. Now there are a lot of people that are coming in that are trying to make Fear Factor money through their content. And in the world that we're in, now we're suddenly hit with people that are trying to be mini corporations and exploit the people out there. And that's a big reason why I wanted to bring you on today, because if there's one word I would have for you, it wouldn't be comparing you to Joe Rogan. It would just be that you are nothing, my friend, but authentic.
Thank you, friend. It means a lot.
So refreshing. And if anything in our wild tangent of conversation today is something that you're interested in, I highly recommend you take a look at what Zach's doing. Got great YouTube content. It's something that can at least bring you some education, as with a massive amount of entertainment as well. And I highly recommend that you check Zach out. And I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on the show, bud.
Appreciate you, brother. I thought we had like 20 more minutes left. I was ready to keep rocking, but I appreciate you all the same, man. Thank you for this conversation.
I'll tell you what, I usually do mine in bite-sized chunks, but if you've got, I'll open the floor for you right now. Go ahead. What's the topic that you felt like when you turned off the microphone over the last month or two, where you were like, I could have talked about that for a little while longer. I'm putting you on the spot, so I'll vamp for you while you think about it, because some of the things that I appreciated you talking about, not only do we have a K-shaped economy right now for the first-time home buyer, but we also have, for the first time ever, a country split as far as where pricing is going. Certain parts of our countries, Austin, Texas is this incredible, a lot of Texas is going through we're seeing prices drop a little bit. Austin, Texas, we're seeing it in a huge way because they overbuilt. Because those builders got those plans set up in 2020, just like you said. And they all those homes got finished in 2023. And then October happened and interest rates went to 8% and they were sitting. Florida's having a terrible time because of insurance, climate issues, and the HOA issues, because that if you don't remember the news story from a few years ago, an entire condo collapsed. And their HOAs have been going through the ringer in insurance. While the Northeast is crushing it, California is completely split 50-50. You can find some places where homes are going for 2%, 3%, 4% more than they were last year, and some places where homes are going anywhere from 4 to 5% more than they were, especially as you get closer to the coast. That was my vamp. Now, take it away. Give me your topic you've wanted to talk a little bit more about over the last few months.
My brain keeps going back to, and this is where the tinfoil hat starts getting more and more for me, is the deeper you look into our history, the more I've realized the reason we're protecting an Epstein list is the reason we can't afford our everyday life. The same exact reason we're trying to keep politicians protected over children is disgusting. And a lot of people will take it as virtue signaling to talk about the Epstein list now. They just want to be seen as good. And they didn't care about that before Trump and this, that, and the third. Both sides are on it. I think that if you look at the web that's been weaved, not just in that ring, but the financial system, you can look at the Panama Papers. I mentioned JP Morgan a little bit. You look into the people like the Les Wexners and the fact that he bought his Manhattan townhome that was utilized for that ring. That Manhattan townhome was sold to him by Les Wexner, the owner of Victoria's Secret, for $1. When you look at the people like the Leon Blacks and the now not Prince Andrews, Duke of York, you see clear and obvious guilt. Clear and obvious, these people are part of it, and nothing's been done. Not a thing. Not one thing. And you have multitudes, now in the hundreds, of women that have talked about what happened, given their stories. And I've heard the argument too, well, why now? I heard it in first person in DC when I went out to the Ro Khanna Massey Epstein victim speech. And they said it clear as day. They said, because we thought we were the only one. And they thought they were alone in what happened to them. And it's being covered up. It's being covered up every which direction. There's even people who would believe that the fact that we're going after mass regime change in the areas we're going after now, like Venezuela and Cuba, and it seems like other ones are right off into the distance, like the Irans and the Colombias, that maybe this has to do with distraction. I don't know if I subscribe to that fully, but what I do subscribe to is that in the same years that the Federal Reserve was founded, we also got this document called the Balfour Declaration, which allowed for Israel to be founded as a country. And it was by the 40s. And it was written to the Rothschild family. And that same Rothschild family is the same one that stores all the diamonds for De Beers in Israel. And they use slave trade to bring those diamonds out and create the pricing that they want. They are the same people that have funded the lawmaking buildings and congressional buildings for that country. They're the same exact family that if you watch an interview with a man named Alan Dershowitz, he was the attorney for Jeffrey Epstein. He was asked a point blank question on Fox News about, are you still representing him? Which was an odd question to me, seeing as he's very dead. But are you still representing him? And he said, no. In fact, I was introduced to Mr. Epstein by Miss Lady Rothschild. And again, the systematic control that's every direction and the same names in every direction. Of course, they said we're not releasing the files due to national security risk, because I believe it truly is. I believe it truly is a national security risk, that the power of America would diminish in a day, that the trust that Americans have in their governing officials would burn up in a moment. And, and you can have the argument of, well, then they shouldn't release it. I say let it burn. I say if we are a nation that is founded on corruption and founded on evil, and we perpetuate greed, mammon-like activities that are at the sacrifice of the working class shareholder of this country, let it burn. And the same exact reason they won't let it burn in that sector of corruption is the same exact reason they won't let housing prices come down. It's the same reason that your health care costs are going to go up. It's for profit. It's for control. It's for power. Everything in my world that I've found comes back to two things: money and power. And as long as people can keep a hold to it, they're going to keep doing it. And until there comes a day where enough people wake up and enough people organize and enough people stop giving money to these big mega corporations, whether it's a general strike, tax strike, striking, I don't know. But I do believe that the problems we face today are the exact same reason that we see actual, true, real-time corruption happening in front of us, and we can't really do anything about it. And it bothers me, and it keeps me up at night knowing that we seemingly are playing in a rigged game, and it's getting more and more obvious and opaque that we're in that rigged game. And it's seemingly, I don't know how to put a button on it, because I'm still in that thought process. But again, it's a red versus blue game so they can buy green. That's all it's ever been. Yeah. They just want to keep you distracted as homeowners so they can buy the neighborhood. They want to keep you focused on the stock market so they can keep whittling money through other markets. And we've seen the corruption, we've seen the fraud right in front of our faces. We've seen the people get charged, and yet they don't get arrested. We've seen the people in the files, and then they don't have any justice brought. And it's just every single time, to me, a slap in the face to the American people. And I dislike it, but I don't know what to do about it quite yet.
Would you be in a situation where you could, as an individual, tout a platform to attack? Let's create this crazy optimistic scenario where what you're hoping for happens and the burning down begins because of a release. Power structure actually gets enough noise that doesn't sound like conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, I would have to say, it's probably just created a nice digestible chunk that enough of the public would get behind it. What would be the sectors that you would want to rebuild first? Were we in a position where we had the power? Would it be big pharma? Would it be healthcare? Would it be getting the election financial ties changed or regulated? Where do you think, if we were to tear it all down and build up again, what's the biggest piece of the puzzle to tackle?
Well, I'm not a smart enough guy to say I have all the answers. What I do think we have power in is community and conversation. And so I would start at the faucet. I would start by saying we have to have term limits, and we can't have lobbying. We can't have foreign and corporate lobbying involved in our lawmaking system. We can't have that infiltration of money. Money is not free speech. And if we could start there, we could simultaneously get rid of insider trading within Congress and hopefully have a group of lawmakers on the Senate and representative side that are there for people over profits. And if we started there, then things would branch. We'd have better committees set up. We'd have better council set up. We'd have people that care a bit more. And then, you can tackle healthcare, which, by the way, universal healthcare might sound expensive, but having a workforce that is actually able to participate is a much more lucrative, in my opinion, option to have, with 65% of our labor force not participating. And a lot of that's health. A lot of it's born off poverty. And the number one bankruptcy factor in America is medical bills. That's sick.
Yeah.
Our GDP, around half of our positive numbers normally come from healthcare. So that's a huge one. But to say what would be my hot button topic, people need to have community. We need to have community. And I think algorithms and allowing these algorithms to just echo chamber people into insanity, it has to be destabilized. We have to get off of our screens. We have to touch grass. We have to come in community to realize that 95% of us agree on about 85% of topics. And of the 15% that we don't agree on, that's where open conversation should be fluid. There's so many different ways to attack an issue. And definitely, the market that we're in right now is created because there's a lot of people that are subject to being algorithmized into a specific echo chamber that gives them the ideology they have. When if we were to come together as a community and actually created a group think tank, we would discover that our ideologies align much closer than they don't. And you'll find this from having conversations with neighbors, coworkers, fellow students, fellow employees, that a lot of the things that we are mad about are their culture wars. And those culture wars create a world where we don't focus on the class divide. We focus on the left versus right, when in reality, it is a humongous up versus down issue. And David hasn't rejoined us yet. So if you're listening to David, I want to let you know you're probably tuned into one of the better podcasts to possibly listen to. Somebody who's focused on a goal financially to be obtained for you and simultaneously realizes the game in which that reward can be won. The reward of an asset does come from playing the game. But one of the best ways to win any game is to understand how it operates, how it originated, what do the rules say, what do the instructions say when this happens, that happens. My question would be to you is, what are you doing to better understand that system? What are you doing on a day-to-day to better yourself, better your heart, better your brain, better your body, get farther away from external influences, physical vices? What are you doing to understand how your emotions regulate? What are you doing to improve your conversation skills, your communication ability? What are you doing to improve you? Because you are the number one asset. There's no asset that exists in your world that is more valuable than what sits between your two ears. That meat computer that fires off with electric and water and throws a bunch of chemicals into your system. If you don't have control of that, you don't have control over anything. So I would challenge you, as you listen to David and you listen to others, to better yourself. It's very easy to stare at the dark because it's very easy to look at. There's so many dark things to stare at. But there is light. There is opportunity. And it does look like David is back. So I'm going to stop ranting.
So I don't know if we're going to keep this podcast or not, but this is really exciting. This was the second time that I've attempted to get Zach because of all the wisdom that you just heard on the podcast. As we started today, technical issues continued. So I went caveman and ripped everything out and plugged it all back in. The one thing I forgot to plug back in was the laptop that's running this, and the battery just died.
The old computer dying. It's all good, man. I held it up while you were gone, brother. I did my best.
Dude,
I did my best.
And it's funny because as I was coming back in, I caught bits and pieces of it. But yeah, the laptop cord is right here, right next to the plug-in for everything else. Well, I'm sure that somewhere in there, Zach actually wrapped things up a million times better than I could. So I want to take this moment to thank him for, Zach, thank you for bringing your beautiful mind, your heart, your compassion, your care for the common man And I probably, as I said, your authenticity is incredible, but I would just like to thank you for your reasonable logicalness. Don't know if that's a word, but that's you, man.
Beautiful word.
Beautiful word. The best word.
What a word. Some say it's the greatest.
People are talking about it. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. And side note, let's keep in touch. I wanna touch base with you every 3 to 6 months and see what the heck you're doing. So thank you for your time, my friend.
Brother. Look forward to that. All right, David. Have a good one, bro.
You too. Once again, huge thanks to Zach. That was amazing. If you've got questions, go to howtobuyahome.com. I'm here for you. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time. You can do this.
Looking for more DIY education or your own personal step-by-step guidance through the home buying journey? Since 2019, How to Buy a Home has been the #1 resource for first-time home buyers. So visit howtobuyahome.com to get started.